When my husband of 36 years handed me a manila envelope across our kitchen table, he didn't even take off his jacket first, didn't pour himself a glass of water, didn't sit down, just set it in front of me like he was dropping off a package and said, "I want a divorce. Everything's been drawn up. The house goes to me, the business goes to me, the retirement accounts, those are mine too. My lawyer says you're entitled to a small monthly payment and you can keep your car." Then he picked up his keys and walked out. My attorney called the next morning after my daughter had quietly passed the envelope to her own lawyer friend. "Dina," she said, her voice tight and sharp, "do not sign a single page. He is trying to rob you." I thanked her and hung up. 2 days later, I signed every page. My husband poured bourbon that evening and called his brother to celebrate. He was certain he had won. He didn't know what I'd already set in motion. He wouldn't know until a Tuesday morning, seconds later, when a process server knocked on the door of the home he'd moved into with his bookkeeper. But let me start from the beginning, the way things like this always deserve to be told. Good day, dear listeners. I'm Dinah. If you're here with me today, I want to ask you to stay until the very end. Because this story is long, and the part that matters most comes last. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I always love knowing how far these words travel. I was 71 years old last October. Retired school librarian, 36 years of marriage, 2 grown children, a farmhouse-style home on the east side of Knoxville, Tennessee, and what I believed, truly believed, was a solid, unshakable life. My husband Dwight had built his HVAC company from scratch. Started with 1 truck and a borrowed tool belt back when our son was still in diapers. Over 3 decades, Tanner Comfort Solutions grew into a real operation. 12 technicians, a fleet of service vans, commercial contracts with 3 hospitals in the area. I was proud of him. I'd helped in the early years, answering phones from our kitchen table, handling the bookkeeping until we could afford to hire someone, raising our children largely on my own while he worked 70-hour weeks. By the time I retired from the library, I thought we'd earned our peace. I thought the hard part was behind us. The signs, of course, were there. They always are. In the spring, Dwight started coming home later. Not just late, different. He'd come in smelling like he'd been somewhere other than a job site. Not sweat and refrigerant, but something cleaner. Cologne, maybe, or the air inside a restaurant I'd never been to. He started leaving his phone face down on every surface. When it buzzed, he'd cover it with his hand before he even looked at the screen. I noticed the credit card statements. We shared 1 card for household expenses, groceries, gas, the occasional dinner out. In February, there was a charge to a florist I'd never heard of. In March, 2 charges to a hotel in Gatlinburg on a weekend he'd told me he was doing a commercial bid in Chattanooga. I asked about it once, gently, the way you ask when you're still hoping you've misread something. "Client took the whole crew out," he said, not looking up from the television. "Reimbursed by the company." I didn't push. I should have pushed, but after 36 years, you develop a kind of trained trust, a reflex that says this man doesn't lie to me. I had to unlearn that reflex slowly, the way you learn to walk again after a fall. The evening he handed me the envelope, I'd made a pot of beef stew, his mother's recipe, the one I'd been making since we were first married. The kind of dinner you make when you feel something going wrong and you want to fix it with food, the way women of my generation were taught to. He didn't eat more than a few bites. "Dwight," I said, watching him push a carrot around his bowl, "talk to me." He set down his spoon, reached into the breast pocket of his jacket, and slid the manila envelope across the table. "I should have done this sooner," he said. "I've been unhappy for a long time." Unhappy. The word landed like something dropped on concrete. 36 years, 2 children, the business we'd built together, 1 invoice at a time. And he was unhappy. "The house?" I said. "It's in my name. The retirement accounts. My contributions. Dwight, we've been married for." My attorney says the offer is more than fair. He finally looked at me then, and what I saw wasn't cruelty exactly. It was something worse, indifference, like I was a minor inconvenience to be settled, not a person he'd shared his life with. "Don't make this ugly, Dinah. Just sign the papers." He left an hour later. I sat at that kitchen table until the stew went cold. I gave myself that night. I cried. I won't pretend otherwise. I sat in the kitchen in the dark and felt every one of my 71 years pressing down on me at once. The fear of it, the humiliation, the specific grief that comes from realizing the person you thought you knew has been a stranger to you for longer than you want to admit. I let myself feel all of it. Then I got up, made a strong cup of coffee, and started paying attention to everything I'd been too trusting to notice before. I'd spent 36 years managing our household finances, not the business accounts. Dwight kept those separate, but I knew how money moved through our life. I knew roughly what the company brought in each year, what we spent, what went into retirement. And I was starting to notice, in the weeks since he'd handed me those papers, that something didn't add up. My daughter came over the morning after. She brought biscuits from the place on Kingston Pike that I like, and she sat across from me and held my hand and didn't say anything for a while. Then she said, "Mom, I think Daddy has been seeing someone from his office." I wasn't surprised, but hearing it out loud made it real. "A woman named Krista," she said carefully. "She's the bookkeeper, been with the company about 3 years. My friend Leanne works in the same building complex." 39 years old. Dwight was 73. I thanked my daughter. Then I asked her for something specific. The name of a forensic accountant. Not a divorce lawyer, not yet. An accountant. She blinked. "A forensic accountant? Mom, what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking," I said slowly, "that your father has been planning this for longer than we know. And I want to understand the full picture before I sign anything." It took my daughter 3 days to find someone. A woman named Ms. Fairchild, who'd spent 20 years as an IRS auditor before going into private practice. Her office was downtown, which felt intimidating, but when she shook my hand, she looked at me like she'd seen this exact situation before and wasn't surprised by any of it. "Tell me everything," she said, and I did. When I mentioned the business, she leaned forward. "Do you have access to any business records, tax summaries, vendor invoices?" "I have our joint household statements. And I have access to the business's quarterly tax summaries." Dwight kept them in the file cabinet in the study. I don't think he thought I looked at them. That's a start. Over the next 2 weeks, I became something I'd never been in my life, a spy in my own home. I photographed every document I could find. Quarterly summaries, vendor invoices, anything with a dollar amount on it. I set up an email account on a device my daughter bought for me, and I sent everything to Ms. Fairchild. Dwight noticed the change in me. I could tell. I stopped asking about his day, stopped making the elaborate dinners I used to cook, stopped trying to draw him into conversation. I was polite, calm, and completely unreachable. He didn't know what to make of it. Once, he asked if I'd looked at the papers again. "I'm being careful," I said. His eyes tightened. "Dragging this out doesn't help either of us." "I know," I said pleasantly. "I just want to be thorough." Miss Fairchild called me on a Thursday morning, 3 weeks in. "I need you to come in today if you can." I drove downtown with my hands steady on the wheel, though my heart was not steady at all. She'd laid everything across her conference table. Documents I recognized, and some I didn't. "Have you ever heard of a company called TCS Supply Partners?" TCS, Tanner Comfort Solutions, his initials. "No." "It was incorporated 2 years ago in your husband's name. On paper, it's a materials supplier for HVAC contractors. In practice," she paused, "it appears to be a shell company. Tanner Comfort Solutions has been making regular payments to TCS Supply Partners for services and materials that don't appear to have been delivered." The room felt very quiet. "He's been paying himself," I said. "He's been funneling marital business assets into an account that doesn't appear in any joint financial disclosure. Over the past 22 months, we're looking at approximately $182,000. $182,000, moved quietly, methodically, out of the business we'd both sacrificed for, into an account meant to give him a fresh start that I knew nothing about. He's been planning this for 2 years, I said. At least. And there's more. Miss Fairchild met my eyes. The bookkeeper, Krista, she set up the invoicing system. She processed every TCS supply partner's payment. She either didn't notice, which I doubt given her position, or she was a full participant. I sat very still. This isn't just a divorce case, Miss Fairchild said carefully. What your husband has done may constitute fraud, in terms of hiding marital assets and, depending on the investigation, potentially falsified business records filed with the state. Can we prove it? We already have most of what we need. I looked at the documents spread across that table, proof of 36 years slowly being stolen from me, and I felt something settle in my chest. Not peace, resolve. Then let's use it, I said. I went home and made dinner, nothing elaborate, soup from a can and bread I toasted myself. Dwight came home late, which was normal now. He found me in the living room, reading. Those papers still sitting on your desk, he said. I've been reviewing them carefully. He sat down across from me, the way he used to when we'd talk at the end of the day. The posture was familiar. Nothing else was. My attorney is running out of patience, Dinah. That's fine, I said, because I'd like to ask you something first, about TCS Supply Partners. The color left his face so fast I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. That's a vendor account, he said. Business expenses. For materials that were never delivered? He stood up. You've been going through my business records. Our business records, I said. I'm still your wife, and in Tennessee, what's built during a marriage belongs to both people, even the parts one person tried to quietly move somewhere else. He was furious in a way I'd rarely seen, controlled rage, like a lid about to blow. You have no idea what you're doing, he said, very low. I have an attorney, I have resources, I will tie you up in court until there is nothing left to fight over. You're welcome to try, I said, and went back to my soup. 2 days later, he didn't come home at all. 3 days after that, while I was in the yard pulling early weeds, a car I didn't recognize pulled up. Krista got out. I'd expected her to look like something out of a cautionary tale. She didn't. She was ordinary in the way that always surprises you. Dark hair, neat clothes, sensible shoes. She walked up my driveway with the careful posture of someone who had rehearsed what she was going to say. You must be Dinah, she said. I thought we should talk, woman to woman. Come in, I said. I'll put on coffee. She seemed surprised I wasn't screaming. I suppose she had expected screaming. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Dwight had handed me the envelope, and she told me, with a kind of rehearsed warmth, that she hoped I could be graceful about this, that Dwight and she were in love, that he'd tried to protect me from a drawn-out, ugly process. That's very thoughtful, I said. I poured her coffee, let her settle. Then, can I ask you something? The TCS Supply Partners invoices you processed, did you know they were for materials that didn't exist? She went very still. My forensic accountant has the complete paper trail, I continued, keeping my voice pleasant. Every invoice you signed off on, every transfer you processed, every entry you created in the system. The date stamps make clear that you were the one who set up those payment records. I set down my mug. That makes you a participant, Krista, not a bystander. She stood up so quickly the chair scraped the floor. I don't know what you think you have, but... My attorney filed the fraud complaint with the state yesterday morning, and my husband received his copy of my divorce filing with my terms this afternoon. She left without finishing her coffee. The hearing was in early November, 8 months after Dwight had slid that envelope across the table. The trees on the drive to the courthouse were the color of fire, which I took as a good sign. Dwight looked like he'd aged considerably. He sat at the table beside his attorney, an expensive man in a good suit who kept shuffling papers with the urgency of someone looking for a card that isn't in the deck. My attorney, a quiet and precise woman who came highly recommended, sat beside me and radiated the calm of someone who had done this many times and was very good at it. Miss Fairchild was there as well, as was a representative from the Tennessee Department of Revenue. The judge, a woman in her late 50s with silver-streaked hair and a manner that allowed no nonsense, asked both sides to present. What followed was the most methodical dismantling I have ever witnessed. Every transfer, every fraudulent invoice, every dollar of marital property quietly walked out the back door of our marriage and hidden in TCS Supply Partners. Miss Fairchild laid it out with the precision of someone who had once done this for the federal government. Dwight's attorney tried 3 separate arguments. None of them held. Near the end of the presentation, my attorney said, "What the financial record demonstrates, Your Honor, is that Mr. Tanner spent approximately 2 years deliberately reducing the documented value of the marital business in anticipation of divorce proceedings. The assets in TCS Supply Partners, $182,000, should be returned to the marital estate and divided accordingly. Additionally, the business should be assessed at its full current value, not the diminished value that appeared in Mr. Tanner's initial disclosure." The judge looked at Dwight over the top of her reading glasses with an expression I will not soon forget. It was the expression of a woman who has heard a great many stories and is not impressed by this one. "Mr. Tanner," she said, "you have been married to this woman for 36 years. She worked alongside you in the founding of your business. She raised your children largely alone while you built your career, and it appears you spent 2 years quietly moving marital assets into a shell company to avoid sharing them with her." She set down the papers. "I hope you understand the gravity of what this court has found." Dwight said nothing. His attorney touched his arm. The ruling took 12 minutes to read aloud. "I retained the marital home. I received 60% of all retirement and investment accounts. I received my share of TCS Supply Partners, which was folded back into the marital estate by court order. I received spousal support for the next 12 years at a monthly amount that made Dwight's attorney go pale. Dwight was ordered to pay my legal fees in full. The fraud referral, the one involving the State Revenue Office, was sent for further investigation." My attorney squeezed my hand as the gavel came down. The fraud investigation moved faster than I expected. By February, the state had filed charges: fraudulent financial reporting, falsification of business records. Dwight's HVAC contractor's license was suspended pending resolution. His largest hospital contract, the one he'd spent years cultivating, was not renewed. Without his license, he couldn't run the company. Tanner Comfort Solutions was sold to a competitor for a fraction of what it had been worth when it was healthy, a fire sale, and most of those proceeds were absorbed by judgments and fees. Krista was terminated shortly after the court hearing. She moved back to where she'd come from, somewhere in West Virginia. I didn't spend much time wondering about her. My son, who had believed, for a time, that his father's version of events was the accurate one, because Dwight had helped finance his small business a few years back, and that kind of debt makes loyalty complicated, drove down from Nashville on a Friday evening after seeing the court documents and sat in my kitchen for 3 hours. He didn't make excuses. He apologized. I made him eat. I told him I understood. We are not people who let things fester, my son and I am grateful for that. My daughter April helped me repaint 2 rooms. Not because they needed it, they didn't, but because it felt right to change something visible, to put our hands on the walls of this house and make it look different than it had when it was a different kind of life. We chose a warm yellow for the kitchen and a deep teal for the study. Colors Dwight never would have agreed to. I started taking a watercolor class at the community center on Tuesday mornings. I had always wanted to try it and never had. I am not particularly talented, but I find I don't care even a little. There's a woman in my class named Rowena, who is 83 years old and has stronger opinions about color theory than anyone I have ever encountered in my life, and I think she might be one of my favorite people. I traveled last spring, a riverboat cruise from Memphis to New Orleans with my daughter, who had been wanting to do it for years and never found the time. We ate too much, stayed up too late, laughed until our sides ached. I saw things I'd never seen before. I felt things I had forgotten I was capable of feeling. The marital home, my home now, legally and entirely, still stands on this east side of Knoxville, with the magnolia tree in the front yard that I planted the year we moved in. Dwight found an apartment. He drives for a delivery service now, from what I've heard, working alongside men 40 years younger because he can no longer work the trade he spent his life building. Once, about 8 months after the final ruling, I was in the front yard when a truck I didn't recognize slowed at the end of the driveway. I looked up. Dwight was in the passenger seat. He was looking at the house, at the yellow paint I'd put on the front door, at the hanging fern baskets I'd added to the porch, at me. I straightened up and met his eyes. He looked for a long moment, then the truck drove on. I went back to my yard. I had planting to do, and a Tuesday class to look forward to, and my daughter coming for dinner on Friday. I had a life, undiminished and wholly my own. The morning Dwight handed me that envelope, I was afraid in a way I haven't been afraid since. Deep, cold, formless fear. 71 years old with no independent income, and the person who was supposed to protect me was trying to erase me. What I want to tell you, what I hope you carry with you from this, if you've stayed until the very end, is that the fear was real, and the outcome wasn't guaranteed, and the strength it took wasn't dramatic or loud. It was patient, it was paying attention, it was sitting at a kitchen table in the dark and deciding, quietly, not to disappear. Know your finances. Know what is in your name. Know that it is never too late, not at 60, not at 70, not at any age, to stand up and say, I built this life too, and I am not going away quietly. Thank you for being here with me today. I'll see you next time.